The hidden curse. Eloin stood in the quiet of the forest, the shadows of the trees stretching across the ground as the last of the daylight faded away. Her heart was heavy with the weight of another day spent in isolation, another day spent running from people who feared her, avoided her, or worse, tried to take advantage of her. It had always been this way, ever since she was a child. It was the curse. Her curse. A curse that had been placed on her long ago, no one knew by whom or why. A curse that made it impossible for her to touch anyone without causing them pain. No matter how she tried, no matter how hard she wished for the ability to experience something as simple as a comforting touch or a warm embrace, it was never meant to be. Her touch was dangerous, and she had learned to live with it. She had spent years in the isolation of the forest, far from the town where she had once been a part of the community. Her family had abandoned her when she was just a child, unable to cope with the fear her curse instilled in them. And so, Eloin had grown up alone, learning to survive on her own without the warmth of human connection. Every night she would retreat into her small cabin, a tiny, worn-out building hidden deep in the woods. It was a lonely existence, but it was all she knew. And then, one evening, everything changed. She had been walking back from the nearby river, her feet crunching softly in the snow, when she saw him, Thorn. He was leaning against a tree, watching her with an unreadable expression on his face. For a moment, Eloin froze, unsure of whether to run or stand her ground, but something in his gaze stopped her. He didn't look at her with fear or disgust. Instead, there was curiosity, and perhaps even something else. "Are you lost?" Eloin asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thorn smiled, a lazy, confident grin that caught her off guard. "I don't think so, but you seem to be." Eloin blinked, confused by his words. "I'm not lost." "Then why are you out here all alone?" he asked, stepping closer. "It's not safe." She immediately took a step back, instinctively raising her hands in defense. "Stay away from me, I'm cursed." Thorn raised an eyebrow. "A curse," he chuckled softly. "Sounds like a lot of nonsense." Eloin's breath caught in her throat, her pulse quickening. "You don't understand. I can't touch anyone without hurting them." He shrugged, unfazed. "Then I guess you won't be touching me, will you?" Eloin frowned. "You don't understand." "I understand more than you think," Thorn interrupted, stepping closer. "But you're not the only one carrying a burden, you know." The words hung in the air between them, and Eloin couldn't help but wonder if there was more to this man than what met the eye. Was he a fool, or was he something else entirely? For the first time in years, Eloin allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, someone could understand. The unseen struggle. Eloin had never imagined that anyone would be willing to stand so close to her, to look at her with such genuine interest and without fear. But Thorn, with his easy smile and unshaken demeanor, was different from the rest. He didn't recoil when she stepped back instinctively, as most did when they realized the extent of her curse. He didn't seem to see her as something to fear, but as something to understand. The following days were strange. Eloin would wake up every morning expecting Thorn to be gone, just another wanderer passing through the forest. But each time she ventured outside her cabin, she would find him waiting near the edge of the trees, just within sight, watching her from afar. He never pressed her to talk, never intruded, but simply existed there, like a constant presence in the background. Eloin found herself unsure of what to make of him. Part of her wanted to push him away. She had never let anyone get close, not for years, not after the heartache and fear of the past. But another part of her, the one she tried to bury deep down, longed for the company. She wasn't entirely sure what she was longing for, someone to talk to, perhaps. A human connection that didn't carry the weight of fear or judgment. Days passed, and as the sun began to set each evening, Eloin would often find herself packing her small cabin, trying to avoid looking outside. She didn't know why, but she felt something in her chest, hope, perhaps, begin to stir. On the fourth evening since Thorn had first spoken to her, he showed up again. But this time, he wasn't standing at the edge of the trees, merely watching. Instead, he walked straight up to her doorstep, knocking lightly on the worn wood. Eloin froze, her breath caught in her throat. No one came to her door, not since her family had abandoned her. Even the villagers from the nearby town would give her a wide berth whenever she ventured too close to the borders of their community. To them, she was a danger, something to avoid. But here he was, standing on her doorstep, as if he had a right to be there. Her hand trembled as she reached for the door, pushing it open just enough to see his face. "You're back," she said, though the words felt odd in her mouth. Thorne smiled, the same confident grin that had unsettled her the first time they met. "I said I'd be around, did I?" He took a step forward. "Mind if I sit?" Aloan stepped back slightly, her gaze flickering down to her hands, instinctively hiding them behind her back. You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's dangerous." "I don't think so," Thorne said, his tone calm and steady. "You're not dangerous, Aloan." She flinched at the sound of her name on his lips. She hadn't told him her name. "How do you know my name?" she asked, her voice sharp. "I'm not some stranger stumbling through the woods," Thorne replied, his gaze softening. "I've been keeping an eye on you for a few days now. I know more than you think." Aloan's heart pounded in her chest. Her instincts screamed at her to shut the door and run, to get away from this strange man who seemed to know more about her than anyone should. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the fact that he hadn't run away like the others. Maybe it was the fact that, despite everything, he hadn't been scared of her. "You shouldn't be around me," Aloan repeated more softly this time. "I'm cursed. Anyone who touches me—" She stopped herself, unable to finish the sentence. Thorne tilted his head, his eyes thoughtful. "And I'm supposed to believe you're cursed just because of a story you tell yourself." "It's not a story," she snapped, anger flaring up within her. "It's real. I've lived it every day of my life." She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms, trying to calm herself. She didn't want to lose control. She couldn't afford to lose control. Thorne's expression softened, and he took a small step forward. "You think that curse defines you, don't you?" His voice was gentle now, without a hint of mockery. "But maybe it's just a story you've been telling yourself, too. Maybe it's not the curse that controls you, but the fear of it." Aloan's throat tightened. She had never been able to put it into words, but somehow, Thorne had just voiced exactly what she had been feeling deep down. The fear had always been there, wrapped tightly around her heart, holding her back from reaching out to others. From allowing herself to believe that someone could accept her, could look past the curse, could understand her. But here he was, this strange man, challenging everything she had believed for so long. "You're wrong," she said quietly. "I'm dangerous. I'll hurt you like I've hurt everyone else." Thorne's smile remained unwavering. "If you're dangerous, then why haven't you hurt me yet?" Aloan's chest tightened. She didn't have an answer. He was right. She hadn't hurt him. She hadn't even touched him. "I'm not afraid of you," Thorne said, his voice low and steady. "I'm afraid of what you're holding back, Aloan. I'm afraid of what you're afraid to face." Aloan recoiled, the vulnerability of his words hitting her harder than she expected. She had been so careful, so closed off for so long. But something in Thorne's words, in his steady gaze, made her feel like she could breathe again. She wanted to scream at him to leave, to run far away, to protect herself from the dangerous path he was leading her down. But instead, she found herself taking a step closer, her voice barely a whisper as she spoke again. "What do you want from me?" Thorne's smile widened. "Nothing. I want nothing from you except the chance to help you see what's possible." The unraveling. The next few days felt like a blur to Aloan. She tried to focus on her daily tasks, gathering herbs from the forest, mending clothes, and cleaning, but her mind always wandered back to Thorne. His presence, though unexpected and overwhelming, had planted a seed of curiosity within her. It wasn't just his unwavering belief in her, but something deeper, a quiet understanding that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, her curse didn't define her after all. It had been a week since Thorne had first appeared at her doorstep, and though he didn't come every day, when he did, she couldn't help but feel a strange warmth in his company. There was no judgment in his eyes, no fear in his voice, only an unspoken promise of kindness. But her fear was still there. Her curse still lingered, shadowing every thought and action. It was as though no matter how many times she tried to push it away, it found its way back into her heart, locking her in a prison of her own making. One afternoon, when the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the forest floor, Aloan ventured out to gather some roots. She knew Thorne would be waiting for her near the clearing at the edge of the woods, as he always was. Part of her felt comforted by his presence. The other part of her felt the familiar pull of isolation, the urge to be alone. She arrived at the clearing and found him sitting by a fallen log, a small fire crackling beside him. His dark hair was tousled, his eyes focused on the flames, but he glanced up the moment she stepped into view. "Good afternoon, Aloan," he said, his voice warm, as though nothing had changed between them. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Instead, she crouched down and began gathering the roots she needed, her fingers brushing the damp earth as she worked. The silence stretched between them, comfortable but heavy with unspoken words. Thorn finally broke the silence. "You've been avoiding me, haven't you?" Aloan stiffened. She didn't want to admit it, but there was no point in lying. She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "I haven't been avoiding you," she replied carefully. "I've just been thinking." He raised an eyebrow as if sensing the lie in her voice. "Thinking about what?" She hesitated, her gaze falling to her hands. She dug a root out of the soil, then another, but the repetitive motion did little to soothe the turmoil inside her. "I've been thinking about what you said," she finally admitted, her voice quiet but steady. "About my curse and about how you think it doesn't define me." She let out a bitter laugh, the sound hollow. "But it does define me, it always has. It's the only thing I've ever known. It's the reason no one will ever get close to me." Thorn's expression softened. He stood up slowly and walked toward her, his movements deliberate but unhurried. "Aloan," he said gently, kneeling beside her. "Your curse doesn't define you. You're more than what you think you are, more than the fear you've carried all these years." Her heart raced at his words, but she couldn't bring herself to meet his gaze. She wanted to believe him. Part of her desperately longed to believe him. But the weight of her past, the constant rejection, the isolation, the fear of her own touch, was so much more real than the hope he offered. "I don't know how to let go of it," she whispered. "I've carried this burden for so long, Thorn. I don't know how to let it go. I don't even know if I want to." Thorn took a deep breath, his fingers brushing her hand lightly, sending a shiver through her. She froze, but he didn't pull away. Instead, he left his hand there, offering a silent gesture of support. "I understand," he said softly. "It's hard to let go of something that has been with you for so long, but that doesn't mean it has to be your reality forever." Aloan closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek before she could stop it. She wiped it away hastily, not wanting him to see her weakness. "Why do you care?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Why are you here? Why are you trying to help me?" Thorn's expression softened even further, his eyes filled with something Aloan couldn't quite place, something tender, something patient. "Because you're worth helping, Aloan. You don't have to go through this alone anymore. You've spent so much time trying to hide from the world, but maybe it's time to let the world in." Her heart twisted at his words. The world had never been kind to her. It had never given her the chance to let anyone in. The curse that bound her had been her only constant companion, and now Thorn was asking her to trust him, to trust someone. But she was scared. Scared that if she let him close, he would see the truth of her curse, the way it twisted everything, making it impossible for anyone to touch her without fear. "Thorn, she started, but the words stuck in her throat. He stood up, offering her a hand. "You don't have to say anything right now, but I'm not going anywhere." Aloan stared at his hand for a long moment. Her mind screamed at her to push him away, to keep him at arm's length, just like everyone else. But something inside her, a small, fragile part of her, longed for connection, longed for acceptance. Slowly, cautiously, she took his hand. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for something more. The weight of the past. Aloan's fingers trembled as she gripped Thorn's hand. His warmth seeped into her skin, grounding her in a way she hadn't felt in years. For so long, she had feared touch, feared what would happen if someone got too close. But Thorn was different. He didn't flinch. He didn't pull away, and for the first time, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she had always believed. They sat in silence for a long time, the crackling of the fire the only sound between them. Aloan could feel the weight of Thorn's gaze, watching her carefully, waiting for her to say something. But she had no words. Everything inside her was tangled in knots, her thoughts warring with one another. Finally, she released his hand and stood, wrapping her arms around herself. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Thorn tilted his head. "Do what?" "Believe that I'm more than this curse," she exhaled shakily. "Believe that I deserve anything other than this isolation." Thorn sighed and stood as well, brushing dirt from his pants. "Aloan, I don't expect you to suddenly change overnight, but you've spent years listening to the wrong voice, the one that tells you you're broken, cursed, unworthy. It's not the truth." She swallowed hard, her throat tight. "Then what is the truth?" Thorn smiled softly. "That you are strong, that you have survived despite everything, and that you don't have to carry this alone anymore." Her heart clenched, but I don't know how to let it go. You don't have to. Thorn took a careful step toward her. Not all at once, sometimes. Healing isn't about letting go. Sometimes it's about learning to carry it differently. Elowen felt something inside her shift, something small but undeniable. She had spent so long believing that her curse was a prison, that it dictated who she was. But Thorn's words made her wonder, had she been the one holding the key all along? But even as the thought settled in her mind, fear still clung to her. She wasn't ready. She wasn't sure she would ever be ready. And then, as if the universe was determined to remind her of the weight of her past, a sharp rustling echoed from the trees. Elowen froze. Thorn immediately reached for the dagger at his belt, his body tensing. Then, from the shadows, emerged a figure she had prayed never to see again. The ghost of her past. The man who stepped into the firelight was tall, his dark eyes cold and calculating. His presence sent a chill down Elowen's spine, her breath catching in her throat. "Hello, Elowen," he said, his voice smooth and mocking. Thorn shifted beside her, his grip tightening on his weapon. "Who is this?" Elowen could barely breathe. "His name is Veyron," she whispered, "and he's the reason I was cursed." Thorn's eyes flashed with something dangerous. "Explain." Veyron chuckled, stepping closer. "Oh, Elowen didn't tell you. She didn't tell you about the price she paid for defying me." His smirk was sharp enough to cut. "She didn't tell you how she brought this curse upon herself." Elowen's hands curled into fists, her nails digging into her palms. "You know why I did what I did, Veyron," she spat. "You gave me no choice." Thorn looked between them, confusion and anger mingling in his expression. "What is he talking about?" Veyron's smirk widened. "Oh, you poor fool, you think she's some helpless victim. She's not, she's a traitor." Thorn turned to Elowen, his brow furrowed. "Elowen, what is he talking about?" She felt the weight of her past crash down on her, suffocating her. She had spent years trying to bury the truth, to pretend it didn't exist. But now, standing here, facing Veyron once again, she realized she could no longer hide. Taking a shaky breath, she looked at Thorn, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was cursed because I tried to kill him." The truth that set her free. Silence stretched between them. The fire crackled, its flickering light casting long shadows across the tense clearing. Thorn's gaze bore into Elowen, searching for answers. Veyron, standing with that infuriating smirk, seemed to revel in her hesitation. Elowen took a breath so deep it hurt. She had spent years running from this truth, but now, with Thorn standing beside her and Veyron taunting her with the past, there was nowhere left to hide. "I tried to kill him," she admitted, voice steady despite the tremble in her hands. "Because he was the reason my family was taken from me. He was the one who ordered their deaths." The smirk on Veyron's face faltered for just a moment before he laughed. "Ah, so dramatic. I gave them a choice and they chose to defy me. Their fate was their own doing." Elowen's nails dug into her palms. "They only defied you because they wouldn't let you enslave them." Thorn's jaw tightened, his hand gripping the hilt of his dagger so hard his knuckles turned white. "You killed her family." Veyron sighed, rolling his eyes. "Spare me the moral outrage, it was business." His eyes darkened. "And she thought she could end me for it. She failed, and so I made sure she lived every day as a reminder of what she had lost." He gestured toward her. "Cursed, feared, isolated, it was fitting." Thorn took a step forward, voice low and dangerous. "That ends now." Veyron laughed again, but this time there was something uncertain in it. "Oh, and what are you going to do about it, human?" Thorn met Elowen's eyes. "What do you want to do?" Elowen's breath caught. No one had ever asked her that before. No one had ever given her the choice. For years, she had lived under the weight of Veyron's cruelty, convinced she had no power over her own life. But she wasn't that helpless girl anymore. Slowly, she raised her hands, feeling the energy shift around her. The curse that had clung to her for so long was no longer a shackle, it was hers to command. Veyron's smirk faltered. "What?" Elowen's power surged, wrapping around him like an unseen force. He gasped as his body stiffened, his limbs locking in place. His smug expression twisted into something else, fear. "You thought my curse was your victory," she said softly, "but it's the very thing that will destroy you." Veyron struggled, but he was helpless in her grip. His eyes darted to Thorn, but the human only stood beside her, unwavering. "You wouldn't kill me," Veyron spat. "You're not a murderer." Eloin took a step closer, lowering her voice. No, I'm not. With a flick of her fingers, she sent him hurtling backward into the darkness. He crashed against the forest floor, gasping for breath. When he tried to rise, his body convulsed as her power held him down. You will never hurt me again, she whispered. Never. And then, with a final surge of energy, she sent him spiraling into unconsciousness. A new beginning. The weight that had suffocated her for so long lifted. She turned to Thorn, her breath unsteady. It's over. He studied her carefully. How do you feel? She had no answer at first. But then, as the wind rustled through the trees, she closed her eyes and realized. I feel free. Thorn exhaled, relief evident in his expression. Then let's make sure you stay that way. She looked at him, truly looked at him. He had been the first person to see her beyond her curse, the first to laugh when others feared, the first to offer his hand instead of turning away. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe in something she had long since abandoned. Hope. Taking his hand, she stepped forward, leaving the past behind. Together, they walked toward the dawn of a new future. The end.